Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. I'd like to ask you all that if you enjoy this content and you enjoy my narrations, please post a comment or hit the like button. If you want to hear more of my content, please feel free to click the subscribe button and ring the bell icon for notifications for when I drop videos in the future. And now, without further ado, let's get into the stories for this evening. The Man and the Screen Window. I'm a female, and the story I'm about to share with you happened almost 10 years ago. At the time, I was 17 years old, and like most teenagers my age, I was content to lock myself away in my room with my laptop and headphones. In autumn of that year, my parents went up north for a weekend. We live in Michigan, and the Upper Peninsula is famous for its scenery that time of year. I was left with the house to myself for the entirety of the weekend and thought nothing of it. I enjoyed my privacy and didn't mind being alone. Let me tell you about my house and where we live. Our house is very old and a modest dwelling. 2 floors and a basement. All the bedrooms are on the first floor, since the second floor is an unfinished attic. The house itself is about 8 miles from the nearest town. The backyard is pretty large, with an even larger cornfield stretching out for acres and acres. Separating the property from the lake on the other side of the trees. The cornfield stretches partially around the house, creating a wall between our house and our neighbors to the east. It wasn't isolated by any means. There are 4 or 5 houses very near, 1 on each side and 3 across the street. A local hunter, a farmer, a retired couple, a construction worker, and a local preacher were the people I called neighbors. It was a quiet road, little traffic, and only the occasional coyote howl to disrupt the night. A nice, calm place to live. It was day 2 of my weekend alone. It was a chilly evening, so I shut my window and locked it before I huddled up on my bed with my laptop. I've always been a big fan of urban legends, especially legends that have some truth woven into the tale. Truth always makes a good story better and makes a scary story all the more frightening. That night, I had no idea that I was about to take part in my own scary tale. While I was zoning out on my laptop, watching horror videos and reading stories online, I heard an odd noise over my headphones. I pulled one speaker away from my ear and focused on the sound. The sound was coming from my window. My bedroom is a corner bedroom, and as a result, I have 2 windows. One window facing my neighbor to the west, and the second window facing the backyard. It was the second window that had the strange noise. At first I thought leaves and loose branches were getting blown against the screen, since it was fall and the weather in Michigan can get pretty harsh and unpredictable. But my reasoning didn't quite fit with the sound. It wasn't a banging or a rattling. It was like metal wires snapping. I removed my headphones and used my laptop screen as a light to see where I was walking without putting a glare on the window's glass. The curtains and blinds beneath were drawn, preventing anything outside from being able to see inside. I was nervous about looking out. I was alone, with no idea what was going on. I hugged my wall as I slipped my fingers under the curtains slowly, carefully pulled down one of the blinds so I could look outside. There, standing in the darkness outside my window, was a person holding a knife, cutting at my screen. My heart skipped a beat as my blood ran cold. My instincts told me not to make a sound and stay out of sight. I slid down my wall and crawled on my hands and knees to my cell, sitting on the small table next to my bed. I called 911 and whispered everything to the person on the other line. I told them someone was outside my window and he had a knife, and that I was alone. The operator stayed on the line with me and kept reassuring me that the police were on the way. I could hear my screen being cut open. I kept telling her I wanted to run, but she insisted I stay put and don't make a sound. Suddenly, the snapping sound of the screen wires being cut stopped. I listened, and I almost screamed in fear when I heard a new sound. The knife was digging at the wooden frame of the window, and the man tried to pry it open from the outside. The motion light in the backyard suddenly flashed on just seconds before the red and blue lights of the arriving police car shone through my other window. I listened carefully and heard someone running from the car to the backyard. I could also hear their radio clicking on and off as they checked the area. A loud knock at the front door made me jump. I heard a man call out for me, identifying himself as a cop. Still scared, I opened my bedroom door and crept down the hall. I peeked into the living room and didn't see anything. The knocking persisted, and again the cop identified himself. I peeked through the window and front door and saw him standing there, his eyes still checking the yard. I flung open the door and almost pulled the cop inside my house, just so happy to see someone else. He asked if I was okay and if I could give a description of the man I saw. I couldn't. He was wearing all black and had a hood pulled up which shrouded his face. All I could do was describe the large hunting knife he used to cut my screen. His partner joined him on the front porch and told us that he didn't see anyone in the area. I kept insisting on what I saw, and they of course believed me, since the patrolling cops saw the damage on the screen. The cops did a second sweep of the property and made sure every single window was secured and that the doors were locked and the garage was secure. Before leaving, the cops told me they'd keep a patrol car in the area, but they were confident that whoever I saw wouldn't be back. They just figured it was some teenager who was trying to break in through my window and got scared when he saw the police car arrive. I thanked them and proceeded to double-check the locks for myself. I wanted to call my mom, but I knew my parents were already on their way back home and would be back by morning. Unable to go back into my room, I chose to sleep on the couch in the living room and tell my parents as soon as they walked in the front door. About an hour later, after I was finally able to relax, started to drift off to sleep on the couch, I heard a loud bang against my back door. I sat straight up and looked through the kitchen into the back mudroom that leads to the back door. Bang! This time I knew I was in danger. I grabbed my cell and dialed 911 again. This time I ran into the kitchen and grabbed a large knife from the butcher's block and huddled on the floor against the counter and cabinets. I pressed the phone to my ear as the operator, a man this time, continued to talk to me so I didn't feel alone. Bang! I gripped the knife tighter and began mentally trying to psych myself up. If this man managed to get inside, would I be able to defend myself? He had a knife. Maybe that's why I grabbed one too. But I didn't know anything about him. How tall was he? How strong was he? Did I even stand a chance? Bang! I heard the wood on the door frame crack. The old door was locked on by a chain. One more hard kick would surely break the door down, and then I didn't want to think about it. I prepared for the final bang, for the door to give in, and for that man to attack me, when I heard a voice yelling over the banging noise. Get on the ground! Drop the knife! Oh, thank God, I said out loud. The cops are here. The operator on the line, who had been speaking to me throughout the entire ordeal, continued to try and keep me calm. I listened to the cop order the man to drop the knife over and over again. But I just knew that the crazy bastard wasn't listening. Then another bang, but it wasn't from someone kicking the back door. It was from someone firing a gun. It was silent, and time seemed to stand still. A gentle knock at the front door drew my attention. The same cop as before was once again identifying himself at the front door. I told the operator a cop was at the door and hung up. I opened the front door, a knife still in my hand. The cop saw it and very calmly suggested I put it down. My hand was gripping the knife so tightly that my knuckles were white and my fingers were cramped. When I dropped the knife, the cop escorted me from the front door to his car, which was parked in the side yard. Under the motion lights of the backyard, I could see his partner standing over the body of a man in black. I could see his knife lying on the ground, just inches from his hand, and even from the distance, I knew there was blood on the blade. The man himself looked like he'd been dead for weeks. His hood had fallen from his face, revealing it to the night. He was white and impossibly pale. His skin was unnaturally aged with heavy wrinkles and lots of discoloration. His hair was long, stringy, and blonde. His eyes, still open, were sunken into his skull. I was taken to the police station to deliver a statement and to ensure that there were no other attackers on my property. When I told them everything I knew to the interviewing cop, another cop walked into the room with a file in his hands. He whispered something to the first cop and handed him the file. I asked the cop if they knew who the man was, and he nodded. I asked to know who he was and what he wanted. At first, the cop didn't want to tell me, but I needed to know. I managed to coax the cop into telling me, and a part of me wishes I'd let it go. The man was a chronic junkie who abused any and all drugs he could get his hands on. He was also a violent schizophrenic with bipolar disorder. He used to live in the area until he was finally locked up in a mental hospital about 20 years prior. The act that got him locked away all those years ago was a result of his attempt to burn down a local church, declaring that he was the true Son of God and that all religious figures, priests, ministers, etc., were false prophets and tools of Satan. The cops figured that he was trying to break into my house because he thought it was where the preacher lived. He had the wrong house and would have killed me anyway if he'd gotten inside. After a moment of letting this sink in, I asked why the cops didn't see him the first time I called. His answer sent shivers up my spine, and now I never look at my backyard the same. He told me that the man had hidden in the cornfield the first time and was watching the house from between the rows. He had never left. He was always there, watching the house and waiting for the police to leave. He truly was crazy, and I'm glad he won't be around anymore. Scary Halloween story. This story happened back in 2017. I was trick-or-treating when my legs started to hurt like hell. Thankfully, my house was nearby, so I walked home. My dad checked on me and said he was going to be at the house across the lawn. I said okay, and my dad left. I was laying on the couch eating some candy when suddenly my body went numb and I couldn't move. My vision got weird, and the best way to put it is big black snowflakes. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I was suddenly able to move my head and looked into the other room, where I saw a tall figure walking very slowly. But then it all ended, and I was able to move again. I told my mom about it along with a few friends. If any of you have any good explanations on why this happened, please tell me. Almost killed by a drug dealer. Hi, I hope you guys are doing well. To fully understand the story, let's backtrack a little. I lost my Uncle Edward to pneumonia in 2014. At the time, I was in elementary school, and I still have the image of his lifeless body sitting in that casket burned into my mind. A few years later, I learned from my dad, my uncle's brother, that my Uncle Edward was an alcoholic and drug addict. My dad had a lot of problems with my uncle lying and stealing. One story that my dad told me about my uncle stands out among the rest, however. This happened at some point in the late 90s. At the time, my uncle and my dad were living with my nana. My dad noticed that the windows of his car were shattered. My dad confronted my uncle about it. My uncle said that kids were responsible. If you have ever had to deal with an addict, you will know that they are not very truthful. My dad knew that my uncle was trying to hide something, so my dad gave him a good beating until he told the truth. My uncle did not have a car, so he stole my dad's car to meet with his dealer. My uncle owed the dealer money, but he didn't have any, so he drove off. The dealer shot at the car as my uncle drove away. My uncle was not injured in the incident. This may not be all that scary to some of you, but I thought it was a scary story. Now I have to live with the fact that I had an uncle who I didn't get to know. Elderly lady in wrong car. Back when I was in high school, my best friend would basically hang out at school together because her dad was the warden of the local prison, and his house wasn't even half a mile from it. Her mom was judgmental and, well, a bit hostile. It was the attitude more than anything that kept me from hanging out over at her house. She was a woman you didn't mess with. One day, my friend said her mother came home white as a ghost the night before because when she and her friends had come out of the grocery store, halfway to her car they stopped and noticed someone in the back seat. She was thinking it was my friend, her daughter. But as she stepped closer, she saw that it was an elderly woman. Well, she started to go to the car, but her friend stopped her and said that she probably got off the bus from the assisted living center, and she had better call the police and let them handle it. Well, she did, and within minutes, because they were practically around the block, the police car pulled up, and she pointed to her car. The officer walked up to the window, and she watched as the officer snatched the door open and literally yanked the old woman out and pushed her against the car and frisked her. My friend's mom was horrified until the officer snatched the wig off the man's head. She was now frantic because if it hadn't have been for her friends, she would have gotten in and offered her a ride home. So, check your back seat, people. The Smiling Man. This was a small event that took place last summer in my home of Staten Island. I live in a community with a bunch of parks and a pool in the center of it all. I was going to meet a friend to smoke and take my girlfriend at the time out for lunch, so I decided to post myself on one of the park's many concrete garbage pail covers. I took my surroundings and I noticed a small boy and a man old enough to be his grandpa. I felt something was wrong. I come from a family of cops, so my blue blood is kicking in. My eyes were fixed on the man. 6'1", brown eyes, fair skin, salt and pepper hair that was thinning, and a red and blue tablecloth button-up shirt. My gut said watch him, so I did. The entrance to the playground was adjacent to me on the left side. The man and the child were making the right turn to come to the entrance as I lit my smoke. I noticed the distance between them. The kid didn't even acknowledge this man. This is where it hits me as the kid runs into the playground. The man keeps walking past the entrance. I broke sight to watch the kid run in. When I returned to the man, he was looking at me, my gut feeling the sense of a predator. As we locked eyes, he smiled, the biggest shit-eating grin, like a malicious child with his hand in the cookie jar. He began to make an exit out of the park, which is adjacent to me on the right side. I ran to the kid and politely asked him, "Hey bud, you know that man in the red and blue shirt?" The child shook his head no. I realized that I may have prevented this child's abduction. I spread the news about this man through the neighborhood like bad gossip. Since I've moved away, I still remember that wide smile, and I pray that that creep hasn't taken anyone.